In this video, I interviewed David Hellard about caffeine use in running, and I specifically wanted to know how does he use it for training as well as races. Now, in my opinion, David is one of the perfect people to talk about this subject, because not only is he a really good runner, but he also has a keen interest in the research around caffeine to the point where he's actually developed his own product. David is also one of the most fun people you'll meet. And I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. We get into what the perfect dose is or the best dose is, how some people may not actually respond to caffeine, or it may actually slow some people down, how to use it in training that it doesn't interfere with your sleep, and loads of other tips that David shares. If you're interested in downloading a guide where we've written all of this stuff down, we've also created that. You can find a link to the article in the description of this video. I first became aware of you or met you during the Great British Beerathon, which is a race that David used to organize, running loads of laps around the same pub with fancy dress and just eating pork pies and drinking ale. But yes, tell us about where did you actually become interested in caffeine, and what's your story around that?
Yeah, I mean, caffeine was more of a need rather than sort of like an inherent interest in it. But I always used to use caffeine when I raced. And back before, like, even caffeine gels weren't that common in, let's say, 2012, 2015. But also I'd find that when I raced, when I got to the stage that I needed caffeine, I often didn't want more gels because my stomach was already gone. And shorter races, 5Ks, miles, interval sessions, you're just not using gels because you associate them with the carbohydrate rather than the caffeine. So I used to cut out strips of Pro Plus caffeine tablets and I'd tuck them under my watch. And then when I needed in the race, because I'd always use it kind of either defensively when I started to tire or aggressively towards the end, I'd be like, right, now it's time to make a break or to push the pace. But I was racing through the Sahara and doing the marathon to Sables. And on day 2, I had a really tough day because it was a June day. And I think I'd just gone out too fast. And so I actually reached in for my caffeine, but I hadn't planned to. So I was already going into caffeine for later in that week. And then I popped it out and lost it in the sands.
No? Okay.
Yeah. And I just thought, this is crazy that this is how I have to take caffeine when I'm racing. When it's such an important drug for performance that at that stage wasn't really understood, or it was understood but probably underestimated by most of the public. So I had a little cry because I was just could barely move. Had a shocking day too. Thankfully rebounded, but then just thought timing wise with. I've been doing another startup called ZipCube, which is Airbnb for meeting rooms. Still going strong, but I was exiting that because it was clear that there needed to be one leader rather than 2 in the company. Okay. And I just thought, well, why don't I actually do something linked to what I love, running? Did a Kickstarter and then just started researching, discovered that when you chew something, the active ingredients are mainly absorbed in your mouth, under your tongue, down your throat. So then thought, well, let's make a chew that's just the caffeine element of sporting performance, not the carbohydrates. And as the saying goes, never look back, really.
Yeah, so I remember we were part of that first Kickstarter that you had. I still have my buff somewhere.
Thank you.
But yeah, then when I stalked you on Google, I also saw you made it to Dragon's Den and all of that as well. But what I'm interested in, because we did a deep dive into caffeine research recently, and that's actually how I came across you again and thought, I need to chat to you, because there is a lot of research into caffeine, and it's quite clear if you look at the research, you can create guidelines for, what the best volume is or dosages and things for each race and things. But I'm also aware that quite often what you see in the research studies, as a physio, I sometimes look at physio research and I go, I can see you've got good results, but I have no idea how the heck you got there, because that will never work in practice. So what I'm interested in understanding is, how you actually came about deciding on what you're putting in Caffeine Bullet, like the dosages, and why the chew rather than a gel or something else that's easier to take, or not just coffee, to be honest. And then also, how do you use it during your races? So maybe we can dive into some of those.
Well, I think the most important thing that people instinctively know already, but haven't necessarily ever thought about, is that caffeine doesn't help everyone. So if you look at, there's been over 50 studies where they've looked at it for sporting performance. And if you look at the metadata, it's around 7-8% of people that don't respond to caffeine at all.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they actually process it too slowly. So strangely, it may sometimes interrupt their sleep. But they won't actually, because they don't process it quick enough, they don't get the benefit of it. And so if those 7-8% of people take caffeine, they will actually slow down when they're racing.
Okay.
Yeah. So generally they should just avoid caffeine ever. There's no point in ever having it.
How would they know? How do you, is it if you have a cup of coffee and nothing happens, you kind of
yeah. Either that or it's strange because there's basically two main genes that determine how we process caffeine. And so the interplay of those give slightly different outcomes. But it's also such a strange drug in that, say, for example, you smoke, you actually process caffeine twice as fast. Whereas if you're on the pill, some forms of the contraceptive pill, it might reduce down, I think, by double the amount of time it takes to process. And so there's all these different drugs that have an interplay with caffeine also. So it could be that if you smoke enough and you don't respond to caffeine, that it plays out slightly differently. But typically, for most people, you'll know if you have a cup of coffee, if you have an energy drink that hasn't got loads of sugar in it, and you're not getting a hyper feeling, then that's because you don't process caffeine well. And then everyone else broadly falls into two buckets. You have the responders that respond above placebo effect. So we know that it is actually, it's not just a factor of taking a pill. And that's around 43% of people. And then you've got 50% of people that are fast metabolizers, which I happen to be, which is very lucky to be, actually.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are in one of those groups, not only does it impact on how much of a performance improvement it gives you in sport, but it also then changes how likely it is to interrupt your sleep later in the day. So we do know some people who can have coffee and just go to sleep straight away. Some people will be up for hours. Weirdly as well, as we've been researching more combinations of drugs, we've launched a product called Brain Bullet that interplays with L-theanine from green tea. And we've been discovering that actually people with mental hyperactivity, things like ADHD, they might actually find a reverse outcome from caffeine where it almost calms them because it gives them, strangely, it gives them focus, which then, because they're normally, their brain is shooting all over the place, that actually feels calming. And so the studies have typically taken a cross-section of all of those people, 100% of them, and have never really separated out what happens to if you just test the hyper responders, if you just test the people who are above placebo, or even if you just test the people who are ADHD or have high alert function. And so whenever you look at the results of these statistics, it's blended of all those three groups. And so while the studies we've seen show that you can improve endurance by up to 6%, muscle strength by up to 7%, and repeat sprint ability by up to 8%, those studies, we don't know what the cut is of those 50%, 43%, 7% of people. And so it could be that actually some of those studies have far more of the 50% or far more of the 7% than you get in the general population. So again, unlike the super shoes, you probably get more variance in the results of caffeine. And the only way to really understand how it affects you in racing is to trial it. Now, the doses that help you 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight is shown to be ergogenic. So it has a benefit in sport, which isn't too much for most people. That's like for red. So when we looked at our doses, our chews, mint one has 100 milligrams. So for most people, that's enough to get a performance benefit in sport. But your optimal dose has been shown to be between 3 and 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilo, which is a huge amount of caffeine, like a monstrous amount for most people. So for someone like myself, that would be 5 cans of Red Bull to get. Because for me, when I've trialed it in things like Comrades and various marathons, I seem to be 5 milligrams is where I really get the biggest blast off.
Okay. Is that 5 milligrams per kilo of body weight?
Of body weight? Yeah.
Okay.
But so there's quite a lot of distance between that 1 milligram and 3 to 6, and how you then use that depends on how important the race is to you, where it is in your training structure, and how it then relates to sleep as well. So if I was running a marathon, then absolutely I go for my full amount. And when I ran a 5K PB, I had 200 milligrams before, I had 1 during, because when if you drink caffeine or eat caffeine through the stomach, it takes about 25 minutes to start to kick and about 45 to 55 minutes to really peak in the system.
Gotcha. So would you take it then about an hour beforehand, or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then again, it also depends on how you use caffeine, because caffeine the way caffeine helps you is it releases fat cells from the liver, which can be used as a fuel source, preserving glycogen stores. So that's part of the endurance. It helps you, stops you running out of glycogen for a bit longer. It releases cortisol and adrenaline, which is the stress hormone and the fight or flight response hormone. And those block the feeling of pain and fatigue. Yeah. So even though you're getting more tired, you don't feel it. You feel like a superhuman.
That's actually interesting, because I've seen research also where they were just interested in how it helps pain. And again, there's strong evidence that caffeine actually decreases pain in people who are not exercising, just regular pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it can be, but also it blocks receptors in the brain where a chemical called adenosine attaches to. And adenosine makes you feel sleepy. So throughout the course of the day, your body creates adenosine to tell you that you need to get to sleep. Caffeine blocks those. And so it stops you getting that sense of sleepiness. When caffeine runs out, that chemical's still there, so it'll still flood back in. So how you use caffeine when you're training, when you're racing, partly depends on whether you're using it as a kind of defensive weapon or as an aggressive weapon. Because for me, I really like the idea of having caffeine in my pocket that I haven't used, because that fills me with a huge amount of confidence.
Okay.
And when I then take it, it's almost like I'm not only using the caffeine for the chemical impact, but I'm signaling to myself consciously, hey, it's go time. We're making a move, or we're going to finish this out, or we're going to smash 3. And so some people will use caffeine just throughout their racing, where it's a constant high level background. I personally much prefer in longer races to use it responsively, where when I start to tire, or I feel that I need to make a break in a race, or if I'm getting close enough to the finish, I'm like, I can close this out sprinting, that's when I'll actually use my caffeine. And then the level of dose will then depend on how long the race is, because something like a 5K, I was taking a 1 chew 5 minutes in, knowing that after another 5 minutes, it would start to kick. I've already got 200 milligrams in my system. I'm hitting my peak in the second half of the race, and I'm getting a second wave of that caffeine that elevates me halfway through the race as well. Someone like Comrades, I actually started nibbling on 30 milligrams. Then the next dose was 50. The next dose was 100. The next dose was 200. And so you're almost taking these steps where you're constantly increasing the level of caffeine in your system, but you don't hit your peak level until substantially later in the race. So actually you've extended the time period in which caffeine is always building, and therefore the power of it is always growing, is how I like to see it.
It also sounds as if you embrace the placebo effect, that you're very much aware of, okay, this is a signal for me as well, and that also helps.
Yeah, and it's almost the before the placebo effect as well. I quite enjoy. I remember I've done some half marathons where I've just not taken my caffeine when I knew I had long enough in the race, short enough in the race, I could just blitz it now and it would carry me all the way through. But I was delighting in the fact that I was running so well that I didn't need to. And that was filling me with so much confidence and positive energy. Like, I don't even need my caffeine yet. I'm that powerful. And that was part of my mental story I was telling myself, that reinforcement of positivity. So it partly depends on how you do it. A lot of marathon runners, say your Kipchoge's or the like, they'll just take 100 milligrams every 40 minutes or so in their gels. But there haven't actually been studies on that. There haven't been any good studies on repeat dosages of caffeine. So that's something we're looking to do in connection with Liverpool, John Moores University, where we're going to be testing, starting off with your optimal caffeine dose at a half marathon, or taking a massive hit halfway, or edging it through if you're running, let's say, an hour and a half marathon. So you've got enough time that it can peak and fall off. Because someone like Paul Booth, who is an ultra nutrition coach, he advocates he'll just drop a bomb halfway through 100 miler.
Okay.
And at that point, he's on his peak caffeine, and he'll then just keep on trying to top up. When Matt, what's Matt's surname? I can't remember. Not Matt East. Recently, the GB record was broken for the 24 hours, and Matt was using one Caffeine Bullet and one ginger ale, which is 33 milligrams every hour for 12 hours. So it's an insane amount of caffeine, and no one actually knows what the right strategy is, but he just knew every hour he was just keeping it topping up. The other thing to factor into all your calculations or how caffeine works is it stays in the system for a very long time.
How long about?
Again, this depends on how fast you process it and also other drugs. So typically it's between 4 and 5 hours is the half-life. Okay. So if you have 100 milligrams at 12 o'clock, at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you've still got 50 milligrams of caffeine in your system. So that becomes important if you're thinking about it interrupting your sleep, or if you're wanting to use caffeine during the evening. If you've had a coffee at 9 o'clock, a coffee at 12 o'clock, and then you have a coffee at 4 o'clock, you've still got 50 milligrams at 1 o'clock. You're adding 100 at 12. So you're on 150 at 1 o'clock approximately. By the time you get to 5 o'clock, you're on 75 of that. You're adding another 100. You're on like 175 milligrams at 5 o'clock at night. So when you get to 10 o'clock at night, you're still on more than a Red Bull.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So it's really useful to have that in mind. It stays at a high level. It kicks after about 15, 20 minutes. If you chew it, if you have it in a strip, it kicks after it peaks 45, 55 minutes. And then it stays at a high peak for about an hour. And then you've still got that impact for about 4 hours afterwards of it halving. So when you're thinking, if you're wanting to use caffeine in your training, and I'll use it mainly at the end of long runs to finish strong, to get me home, especially if you're doing progression runs. I find it really, really beneficial. But also I'll use it in tempo runs if I've just started marathon training for the first time in over 10 years. And I'm quite scared already of the sessions I have to do each week, because they just seem so hard compared to what I've run this last 10 years. And so just having caffeine that you can drop, after 2-3 miles of it, knowing this is going to just help you a little bit, I find really beneficial. But because I often run at night, it makes it hard to do that without it interrupting your sleep. So I know that if I've had no caffeine during the day, at least I'm starting at 0 caffeine in the system. Whereas if you've had a coffee in the morning, you've had a coffee at lunchtime, then actually that's background noise that when you add caffeine during your training at night, you've got quite a lot for your system to get through.
I understand. So the other thing that was interesting, because I'm listening to you talking about this, and I'm actually just thinking about me during the day and what I'm doing in my work day, thinking, okay, that explains a lot. I when I trawled your website, I want to get back to the green tea thing, because you had there's a new supplement that you've just created from green tea extract, and I couldn't quite understand the difference between that and caffeine per se, and why that helps mental clarity more than caffeine does.
Yeah, and we don't actually fully understand the science of it, because it's so new. It's deemed a novel drug by the EU and most countries. So green tea, and most people know this through matcha and the way that's marketed, has L-theanine in it. And
well, I'm asking you this because I hate matcha.
So what we've done, we've extracted the L-theanine from matcha, and L-theanine as a drug, it's known as a non-drowsy sedative, which is quite almost not a contradiction in terms, like an oxymoron. And it releases alpha brainwaves, which relax you. They put you into a kind of created, calm, zen state. And studies have shown that when you take caffeine in combination with L-theanine, particularly if it's kind of 2 doses of L-theanine per dose, 2-to-1 ratio, L-theanine to caffeine, then it seems to be counteracting the physical impact of caffeine, but not the mental impact. So you still get that mental alertness from blocking the chemical adenosine, but it's mainly the cortisol and adrenaline effect of caffeine seems to be dampened. So studies have shown that it reduces the heart rate spike that you get from caffeine. It reduces the impact it has on loss of sleep. And so you can take it and just get more of a prolonged, relaxed focus without that big kind of jittery and energetic kick the door down spike. Caffeine. But having said that, we've still got these different buckets of people where you have the people that do respond to caffeine, the people that don't. There's different absorption speeds for caffeine and L-theanine. You have the people with ADHD who already find caffeine doesn't give them that spiky feeling. And so we're very cautious about how we market the benefits of the product, because we just don't really know how it interplays with all of those different gene buckets, or we don't know whether it will, if it truly does that for everyone, because we know that 8% of people react to caffeine differently already, and so it's something that we would love to test a lot more to get an understanding of how it interplays, but it does limit the benefits for sport, it seems. So
gotcha.
It's great for in the office, but terrible for going for a run.
Gotcha. So the other thing that always concerns people when they think of caffeine is that it can, for some, bring about quite a lot of stomach, bowel movements and things. At least it doesn't make you as ill as having too much sweet or stuff like that. Do you find that it affects bowel movements during races, or is it okay because you're taking it so far ahead? How do you deal with that type of thing?
I mean, if I'm honest, if you take a caffeine bullet and you have issues with caffeine, you'll just get the same issue but faster. So
you can get to the toilet, get out, and you're ready for it.
So yeah, I mean, we haven't got a solution for that. Yeah. I personally always take Imodium before I have a big race anyway, because I find that quite often your stomach's upset from the increased carb or the stress, and it doesn't seem to have a negative impact on performance. I also take it before a music festival as well, just so you have to go to the toilet less. So it's back from Glastonbury, so it definitely helps me there. The fewer trips to those horror cabins, the better. it does. Unfortunately, it does have an impact on some people's stomachs, and we don't know a good solution for that other than practice and getting used to it. Really, you can. Your body does get used to caffeine, but also that's another thing to factor in as well. If you're regularly using caffeine every day to stop yourself from being tired, you reduce its impact. And so we recommend people to take less caffeine in their life, because those receptors that we mentioned that get blocked by the caffeine, your body wants to be tired. It needs sleep. So it actually grows more of those receptors.
Okay.
The longer you take caffeine frequently, then the more caffeine you're going to need to actually stop yourself feeling tired, which is why you suddenly see some people who have those Turkish coffees, or why people can. No one needs a can of Monster. Like 200 milligrams is a huge amount, unless you're really going for benefits in a race or the gym. But people are used to that, and actually the performance benefit of caffeine does seem to be reduced for mental performance. There's differing studies on how much it impacts or reduces the physical performance, because they've looked at studies where you cut out caffeine before a race or not. And some have shown that it's beneficial to cut out caffeine. Some haven't. Like an Ironman study actually showed those who didn't reduce their caffeine down beforehand still got the same performance benefit. So I always recommend to people that if caffeine is like a regular part of your life that you need, that you don't feel normal without it, then it's better not to disrupt your sleep, to potentially get withdrawal symptoms of headaches and to just try and cut down a bit. But if you are in the position that you can cut it out, I'd recommend that, particularly if you're doing races where you need to be sharp, mentally sharp. So say you're doing adventure racing or you're doing ultra racing, where it becomes very hard to make good decisions, or particularly when it comes into calculating nutrition, or it is worthwhile cutting caffeine out, because it will improve the mental sharpness you get from it.
Gotcha. And the other big question that I always have about supplements, because I've seen so many negative headlines through the years with just because it's not regulated, so there can be any crap in it, to be honest. How do we know that we can trust when we have a supplement that it has in it what it says it's got in it?
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. There are some, you can get Informed Sport or Cologne List. And so Informed Sport's a British company where they will test each batch of a product for ingredients. You then have Cologne List, which is a German organization. So we're part of the Cologne List, just because we basically make our products so frequently that it would cost us a huge amount to test every batch. So they look at the process instead. So you can always see which of your products are on those lists to understand. It's still very hard, because it partly comes down to just trust in a brand and a product, and if you know it well. So our products are all made in a sweet factory, so the only contamination that could happen is more likely to be with coconut or with sherbet lemon, or but it's tricky. I'd say a lot of the time you can search for Cologne List, you can search for Informed Sports to be 100% sure. Outside of that, it comes down to almost an element of credibility, where you have to think about, is this a company I know that actually probably understands things like supply chain security? Are they likely to be having things manufactured in a location that is manufactured with hundreds of other products that are maybe choosy? So it's all small things like that, but it is extremely difficult. And we see with the Golden Trail athletes, it's very hard for them to even get it right, where you've really got to think about everything you're using, not just what you're eating. And, if you're having moisturizers, if you're having any kind of sports performance or even physical performance, it is really important that you you look into it, and you can get stung. Like Colin Baxter, who was a skier years ago, lost his bronze medal because he was using a Vicks nasal spray that doesn't have an ingredient in the UK that does exist in North America that wasn't even on the ingredient list. And it wasn't a performance benefit, but it was on the list. And so he lost his bronze medal, even though clearly it wasn't something. He had a cold and he was doing what on paper seemed like the right thing to do. And like, how do you, it's a really tricky situation at the moment, basically.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So what else do you feel we've left out? What do you feel is worth discussing still?
Good point. I'd say the main thing is that it's to play around and to discover for yourself. But strangely, my view is that most people are using too much caffeine day to day.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're not using enough caffeine when they train. And so actually, I'm sat here with a pint of tea that is decaf tea. You quickly adjust to the flavor. I have decaf coffee. It's not as good, but you quickly adjust the flavor. I don't have caffeine unless I'm racing or I'm training. And it means that I can have less caffeine and still have quite a good performance benefit from it. And that means it's not going to upset my sleep. And also I can do that semi-regularly. I probably use caffeine twice a week. At the moment I do because I'm expanding my mileage and I'm just not.
It's that marathon training program.
Oh yeah. And so, but I mean, I probably have it a little bit more because I've got a baby and I often fall asleep if I'm out at play or comedy or with friends. And so I take out, we've got this product called Ginger Raws. It's like a third of a coffee, ginger coconut cheese. And so I'll have those just so I won't fall asleep when I'm out without taking, it's not like taking a Red Bull that's going to keep you up. But so I'd recommend people actually start to think, when could they see a performance benefit in their training? And most people aren't using caffeine in shorter races or in tempo runs or even in interval sessions. And think about, it's not just about necessarily the performance benefit during that session. But for me, one of the struggles of training is you can put off running because you're so scared of that run. You fear, you're like, I've got to do 22 miles today, or I've got to run like 8 miles at marathon pace. And it ends up being a stress on you that has a physical toll. But also you often then don't do it at lunch. You end up doing it at like 8 at night because you're putting it off because you're just dreading it. And actually having caffeine in your pocket that you can use, it just removes that fear factor and also puts you in a very different frame of mind coming into a training session, because you go in there thinking, I'm going to be the champion of this effort.
You know what? This is probably the bit that I'm going to remember of this whole podcast now, because in my head, it's me dreading just the 5K I've got to go run when I've been really unfit. And I know exactly the feeling you're talking about, but I had never for a moment imagined that somebody like you feels the same way about their training. Because to me, you're this Energizer bunny whenever I've seen you that just hop around and must love just running miles. So that's actually quite good to hear.
And if you talk to someone, we interviewed Chris Thompson, who's British Olympic champion a few years back, an Olympian, and he was saying that if he will have a physical weight on him all week when he's coming into his heavy training loads, because he fears it so much, because he knows how hard it is. And so even someone who he has run his whole life, he's done these weeks every year, twice a year, and yet even he has this utter dread of the actual run. And when you finish your first mile, it's fine, you're in it. It might hurt, you might not make it in the way you want, but we all have that. And actually the people only think of caffeine for the physical impact of it, and they forget that it can completely change your mood and your approach to your training. And actually you always know you've got this breakout in case of emergency in your back pocket, that if it comes down to it, you're gonna dominate this run.
David, thank you so much. It was a really interesting conversation. How can people get hold of you, or where can they find you? You've got your own podcast and things that's well worth listening to.
If people are interested in it, we've rebranded to Performance Bullet because we're bringing out electrolyte chews. But Performance Bullet delivers to most countries. We're on Amazon, but it's cheaper on our site. And they're basically 100 milligram chews that kick faster than gels, or strips, or coffees, or energy drinks. Bad Boy Running is a podcast that it's a mix between interviewing the best athletes, the people who understand running more than anyone else, with just the best stories in running as well. And we intersperse the nonsense of our lives that is sometimes about running, sometimes not. Yeah, and if people are looking for a good way into it, probably the best ones, good episodes are, because we've done about 700 now, so it looks a bit daunting. The one with Charlie Webster, I think, is incredible, where she basically gets malaria while she's cycling to the Olympics. She's an incredible broadcast, very funny. That story is insane. If you've got a lot of time, we speak to a guy who's walking around the world, and he's 29 years into it. No, that was a few years ago. He's now 25 years into it. He left when he had a boy who was 9 months old. What's his name? Carl Bushby. That was 3 episodes, because the stories in there are nuts. Or if you want to find if you're looking for performance, then some really good episodes we speak to Professor Andy Jones 2-3 times about his work as a physiologist for Paula Radcliffe and Kipchoge. Or you've got we actually have a head-to-head between Tim Noakes, who is we've had him 2 or 3 times, but we had a head-to-head between him where he was representing the no-carb diet against Rena McGregor, who is the GB 24-hour nutritionist, also does Royal Ballet, and who is a proponent of high carb and also an expert in relative energy deficiency, particularly in women. And that episode's amazing, because you see, we love Tim, but we feel Tim as somewhat, while he has a point that carbs isn't good for everyone, overstates it. And so it was very interesting to actually hear 2 experts trying to civilly go to war as such. I also host, present, commentate the Golden Trail World Series. So that's the Formula One of trail running around the world. So you can see that on, I think, 100 channels worldwide. But on YouTube, they do a lot of the replays, and I also edit and narrate the recaps. So if you love trail running, the storytelling in that is, the races are insane, because unlike ultra, people are running down hills as fast as they can, and the talent is insane how fast they can travel. It's just amazing to see.